Mental Health Monday.
Another episode of Mental Health Monday.
And so I'm like, all right, whatever, you know, this is what it is. Came home, started doing online school. Like things were kind of bad for everyone too. So I was just like, I feel fine, especially considering everything that's going on.
You did a comparison of, well, since things are bad, what I'm going through isn't that bad.
Or like, I must be feeling bad because of what's going on. Everyone probably feels this way to an extent. Or yeah, I never really felt like, oh, you know, there's a problem going on because it's COVID. Like, of course I can behave this way now and not feel too bad about it. And then summer happened, and it was a very unhealthy summer for me. It was a really fun summer, but it
was fun. But it was unhealthy. But it was fun.
It was unhealthy. You know, you can have fun being unhealthy. It's not recommended. It's not recommended. It's a bad decision. Like, but I definitely like ignored all of the safety warnings of mental health.
Fuck it.
Yeah, I was just like, fuck it. Yeah, fuck it. Like, I am going to be an absolute degen this summer. And I went back to St. Louis and lived there, and I just like,
picking up the pieces. Yeah,
it was fun. It was really fun. It was unfortunately fun, but it doesn't go without moments where my mental health was also bad. And there were a lot of things that were going on. In fact, I started to notice other people who had mental health problems at the time.
You started seeing the associations.
And so I started seeing them, and then that either caused me to be like, I don't look like that, so then how could that be me? Or I started to just think like, man, I need help. Like, all these people have parents who get them meds, who get them, you know, therapy, or that help them kind of actualize whatever they're going through. And at the end of the summer, so I was in St. Louis from May through the end of July. Came back here for a little bit, then went to the beach. And when I was at the beach, like, it was really fun, but there were moments that were super low. And I had a few moments where, like, I just kind of cracked. And so there was one moment I had at the beach I'd prefer not to go into details on, but it kind of scarred me. And for the next, like, week or 2 weeks after it happened, before I went back to school at the end of August, this was probably in, like, mid-August or so, I just thought about it every day, and it made me super depressed. And so then when I moved back to St. Louis, you know, I gave it a second shot on the therapy side of things. And I called my grandmother and kind of explained to her what was going on in my family, and was like, can you help me get a therapist or get help for sort of what I'm going through, what others are going through? She did, and it took a couple tries, but we found a really good therapist.
Therapy is a dating game.
It was, and I got lucky, you know. First date went very well, and I've been going on dates since, but found my therapist in St. Louis, and we started doing it all virtual because of COVID. And I think pretty early on, now he'd have to confirm this, but I think he could tell part of what I was struggling with was some trauma, some, like, self kind of confidence issues, and understanding of what we now talk about, which is sort of process versus content, and like struggling with, like, the process that goes on in my, like, rationalization of my mind, or like the actual content. So I met with him virtually for, like, let's say, like, 7 months or so before doing it in person, maybe 8 months. It was like September of 2020 through maybe April of 2021.
And that 7 months was just to figure out if you guys were a right fit.
Yeah, and that was just to figure out, so maybe more like 9 months or 8, but whatever it was, that was just, not just to figure out if we were the right fit, it was to really kind of get to know each other because there was a limit to what we could do online and talk about. And his treatment approach for trauma is EMDR. And so he was like, we'll start doing trauma work once we meet in person. So
eyeball flare reaction. It's something having to do with how you react to things, right?
EMDR,
Yeah.
electromagnetic, something reactive. I don't. It's a brain. It's a trauma therapy that centers on right brain, left brain stimulation, and the goal is to kind of think about how trauma causes our the sides of our brain, or sort of the way that our brain interacts with each other, the way that the lobes of our brain interact with each other to kind of overload and be either too rational or too creative in the thinking of it. And so part of what EMDR is it's kind of like a lockbox for memories, and your goal is to introduce something bad that happened and take it out of the lockbox, which is sort of where the trauma is, and expose it to different sensations while stimulating your left and your right brain. And in the process, you're able to become more comfortable with the unpleasant things that are associated with certain memories. So it's tough to explain in short. And
I think you just gave great examples.
Thank you. So, but we started doing EMDR around the same time. So I had that unpleasant experience with the psychiatrist and was calling the hotline. And at first, and even now, EMDR was I did all that online with him, and we got there. And there's some other stuff I could talk about in my journey on the way to that point. But I don't think it's as none of it's too important for now. So this is really where things start to get interesting.
Okay.
So, I started doing the EMDR with him. I started getting the meds, and generally that month, which was May of 2021, things started going much better for me. And I came home to DC. I was much happier. I had all this more energy, but I was also generally way more loosey-goosey, kind of spiritual, which is not a bad thing, but it was almost to a fault internally. I started talking about sexual things in kind of my notes way more than I usually did. I started even having kind of these hypersexual tendencies. And
do you think you became outlandish?
Just
internally outlandish.
A little bit, yeah. Definitely a little out. I don't know. I think I became too very explorative. I became overstimulated, I would say. And so, but I was doing the EMDR and I was practicing it on my own, tapping my right leg and my left leg and listening to music and trying to focus on the trauma. And it got to a point where I'm now manic. I'm working on trauma, and I'm back in DC in a more normal environment because things are opening up for the first time since February of.
So you're having a ton of stimulants.
Ton of stimulants.
Yeah.
And I'm smoking weed all day, every day, or smoking weed every day. It wasn't that bad. The weed smoking hadn't got out of hand at that point, but it was pretty bad.
Yeah.
Started to get bad when I came back around this point. And I just started having all of these highly philosophical, spiritual thoughts. And many of them were actually very enlightening. And I still reflect back on now, and I'm that manic experience really helped me gain a new perspective, which was valuable as much as it was damaging. But to focus more on the negatives, because I don't want to glorify mania in any way.
Yeah.
I started to tell myself by mid-June of 2021, the thing that I kept telling you about earlier, I beat depression and anxiety. These things my suicidal ideation was bad. I thought about killing myself every single day for so many days in a row. And I kind of these hotline calls. I had all this therapy, and somehow I've prevailed by some combination of things. And at first it started to be fine. And then we get to the point where I'm like working out twice a day. I moved back to St. Louis in mid-June, after a few weeks here. And I moved back to St. Louis in mid-June.
See the trend coming.
And I had no idea how bad it was, but it was like energy was off the walls, sexual energy was off the wall, and it was like all these different things were like turned up to the max. And then all of a sudden, like after a few weeks of just kind of being like manic and like harmless, like I mean, people probably looked at me and were like, Peter's really like had a change in perspective or something. I don't know what they would. Peter's really like pushing it right now, but I think most people weren't like, oh, Peter's like, you know, criminal, or like his energy is like harmful to him or to other people. The only time I really remember anyone being upset with me was like my roommate got mad at me one day because I went to a bar to watch the Euro Cup final instead of watching it with him. I was like, ah, damn.
You're like, oh, that was what you're mad about. Oh, man.
Mad about that?
Okay.
What?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All this other stuff, and that's what made the cut.
Yeah.
Got you.
So I don't even